When you're on a march under a blistering hot sun, even that chlorine tastes good.
If I could make a wish, I think I'd pass. Can't think of anything I need.
What up, tubers? Happy Sunday. I think, is it Veterans Day or is that tomorrow? I don't know. It might be Veterans Day. Just a second. Okay, so apparently today is officially Veterans Day and tomorrow it's observed. I don't know. So happy Veterans Day, fellow veterans. So all I have for show and tell is 2 bottles of CBD oil for I guess multiple uses. I am using it for pain relief. These are very expensive. If you haven't looked into this cannabinoid oil, it's not cheap, so it better work. So the reason I decided to make this video was because of a video I saw yesterday by a channel that I subscribe to, a channel that I like. So I'm not trying to bust anybody's balls on this video. I do actually like this channel, and this isn't any sort of a I'm not picking this individual apart. He made it very clear what he was doing and was very open and honest about the whole process. The channel is JonXArmy, which again, I enjoy his channel, and I am a subscriber and a regular watcher. Yesterday he did a live stream where the point was he was going to start a fire with a magnesium ferro rod, which I'll go into in more detail. First of all, he went like full native with this thing. He didn't have any sort of tinder. He didn't have say the Vaseline cotton balls. He didn't have anything as a ignition or a fuel source. He basically I don't know where he lives, somewhere clearly that's cold, because there was snow on the ground, and he was in his backyard with sort of a fire pit grill type thing, and he gathered, you know, twigs and bark and, you know, various sized pieces of wood from the yard and the surrounding area, and scraped off the magnesium onto a leaf, and basically it was really difficult to watch. He admits it was the first time he'd ever used a magnesium rod, and that was clearly evident. I don't know, we've got some really troubling signs as far as what may be coming here shortly. If you're not proficient with getting a fire going, I would definitely suggest doing what JonXArmy did yesterday, and that's practice. In a real situation, what happened yesterday with that fire, I mean, he burned so many calories getting that fire eventually started, which took over 1 hour, just over an hour to get that fire going. He could have had that fire going in just a couple of minutes, but there are some mistakes made in this video. If you have any experience with well, not even just the magnesium strikers, but fires in general, you will easily be able to count like all kinds of mistakes and errors made as to why it took an hour. But it's a learning process. I think the next time he does this, and hopefully he does do it again, and hopefully he live streams it again, If he learned from his mistakes, he should cut that down at least in half. I would expect him to cut it down to just, a few minutes. Some of the mistakes made were he did not have his tinder and his kindling and his fuel sources ahead of time. So at about the 1 hour point, when he finally got a flame that started to take, he then had to leave it unattended and basically run back and forth to the wood pile and stuff to get wood to keep adding to it. Not the way to do it, obviously. You're going to want to start with a tinder bundle of, depending where you're at, they've kept mentioning cattail, which I don't know why. Their cattails grow on the edge of like ponds and lakes. They were in a suburban backyard. There was no cattail. Cattail would have been great and would have helped out a lot. I think it sort of turned into a running joke. I'm not sure how serious they were about the cattail. It seemed like it was sort of a joke between him and the guy that was running the camera. But that sort of stuff, old man's beard, dryer lint, anything that's fluffy to make the nest to get your spark started. He shaved off literally so much magnesium off that block. I mean, he exerted so many calories when that all could have been done really quickly in just a few minutes tops. Like, it was difficult to watch, but just a fantastic lesson if you sit down and watch the full video. I'll put a link to it. And again, this isn't to burn anyone or to condemn his fire making skills using a magnesium ferro rod. He is straight up, tells you right up front, he'd never used one before, but he would have had a much easier time if he had planned it out ahead of time. There was one point where he was blowing on it to give it oxygen, which it was going fine, and then he did what he did several times throughout this process, was he smothered it by and this is something a lot of people do who aren't real familiar with making fires and who are making a fire in a not like, you took your family camping and you want to make a fire, more like a fire where it's cold and you need warmth, and it's like it's very important that you get this fire started. People tend to jump the gun, and as soon as the flame starts, they start putting on much too large pieces of wood. They jump ahead in the fire curve as far as how they should be building this fire up, and they jump straight to large pieces of wood. And especially if the wood is green or wet at all, it's just not going to take. You've got to get the base going with a lot of toothpick-sized dry twigs, and then graduating up to pencil-sized twigs, and then up to eventually up to little logs or tree branches that you're going to be burning. And a lot of people tend to see that flame start and go straight to like the larger pieces of wood, and generally what that tends to do is collapse onto the fire and basically put it out, which happened several times. He had a good piece of bark to use for tinder, and instead of like shaving it and getting some shavings off of it, he got a flame going and just set that bark right, and it was like snuffing out a candle. As soon as I saw him going like this, I was like, and out went the flame. So his video is a fantastic learning video if you're not really good with starting fires, especially using something like the magnesium ferro rod. Those magnesium blocks with the rod, those are not beginner tools. That is basically one step below a hand bow, rubbing two sticks together. I think people get the impression like they buy one because they have them like at checkout lines for $1.99. You can get them at Harbor Freight for $1.99 or what have you, and they're really easy to come by. And I think a lot of people get them and then just assume, oh, I got this in case I ever need a fire. It doesn't work that way. You don't. I think people in their mind think, oh, I just shake some, but it's on there, spark, fire, good to go. When the magnesium ignites, it burns hot and it burns quick. You've got maybe 2 seconds to get the tinder started, or that magnesium's burnt out and you have to start over again. That's why you need all your kindling and all your fuel ahead of time in gradually, larger piles, so that you start with one and go, graduate up till you have a fire. Like I said, it was a very painful thing to watch. At a certain point, I think he just started kind of making fun of it because he realized that like this was not going well. But like he did, now is the time to practice this stuff. You don't want to wait until you have no choice and you need that fire. If he finally had just given up and it wasn't going to work, he was 30 feet from his back door. He could have walked inside and been fine. There could be a time shortly where that's not going to be the case and you have to get that fire going. He also didn't really have, the whole point was he wanted to boil water and make a cup of coffee. That was like the end goal of this fire. But he didn't have any, he didn't plan ahead on how he was going to boil the water, other than that he had a pan. But he ended up basically setting the pan, for the most part, directly on the fire. There was a stick or two that was, semi-large, that was kind of under it. But at one point, I think the stick, one of them burned through and the pan tilted and some of the water spilled. So he didn't plan ahead to have some sort of apparatus, whether it be, a grate that was up on rocks, to keep it above the fire, or, a kind of a, what would you call it? Like a, not a tripod, but you know what I'm talking about. Something to hang, so the pot would have hung above the fire. None of that. So once he finally got the fire going after an hour, he basically stuck the pan directly on the water, or on the flame. It did tip and spill at one point, almost put the fire out, lost half the water in the pan. It was a real train wreck. It was a tough shit show to sit through, but a valuable learning lesson. And he was completely upfront and honest about it. He wasn't trying to front like, he didn't come across as like he was some, master keeper of the fire, and that it was, started making up excuses. He basically at one point admitted that this was a lot more difficult than they make it look on YouTube videos and on TV. So a very important lesson. Like I said, the magnesium ferro rod is not for beginners. I do not think that you're just going to pull one of those out of your pocket when shit hits the fan and just start making fires left and right. They're tough. He admits in the video that 99% of every fire he's ever made, he wads up paper and uses a Bic lighter. And that's probably what most people do. I cannot stress the Vaseline cotton balls enough. Mike and I have a video that we made where we light these with a ferro rod, but we light one just like out of the pack, and then we take one and you fluff it up a little bit, and then we timed how long they burned, and I think the solid like this burned for like, I can't remember now, but it was like 9 minutes or maybe more, and the one that was fluffed up burned, I don't know, 6-7 minutes, something like that. And the one that's, when you fluff it a little bit, break it up and fluff it, it lights like that. He would have, if he'd have had one of those, he would have had that fire going literally in less than 10 seconds instead of an hour. So yeah, his point was, he didn't have that, and that was, he was going to start a fire with basically no fuel other than twigs, sticks, and bark that he could find around, and the magnesium ferro rod. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's not an hour-long process. That should have been a minute to get that going. I'm not like Olympic grade fire starter, but I can use a magnesium ferro rod from scratch and get a fire going in under 5 minutes for sure, and that's with gathering the material. But like I said, I hope he continues to do what he did yesterday, because he's going to get better each time, and it's going to serve him really well in the long run. Anyone who hasn't, like I said, you know, a lighter is going to be your primary way to start fires, and eventually we're going to run out of lighters or butane or whatever, and then you've got, you know, a ferro rod with Vaseline cotton ball that you can light a fire literally within seconds. Eventually, over time, we're going to get down to where you're going to have like the magnesium fire starting rod and like a bow drill, or, you know, rubbing two sticks together. So everybody pretty much understands how to make a regular fire with a lighter and some paper. If you've got fuel, if you've got, you know, dryer lint, which I should have brought out here. I have those they're not sandwich, they're snack Ziploc bags. They're like half bags, they're like this big. I just wadded as much dryer lint as I could fit in those and seal them, and I put them in my I have a lot of bug out bags. I put it in the bag that I take every time I go to camp contingency. So there's like a small pocket on that backpack. I have the bag of dryer lint. I have some, I think I have some Vaseline cotton fireballs. We have to make a lot more of these. We were looking. I thought I had a ton of them. I don't know where they're at. We found this pack, and I think there may be one or two other small packs. We need to make literally hundreds of those things, because they are instant fire. One of those cotton balls, and you'd have to be really inept not to get a fire out of it, because like I said, they'll burn if you fluff them up 8, 9, 10 minutes. If you can't get a fire going with a flame going for 10 minutes, you probably don't deserve to have a fire. But the dryer lint in the snack bag, Ziplocs, got it in my bag along with, I don't know what else is in that pocket. I think there's nitrile gloves, a Sharpie, a Bic, whatever fits in that little bag, you know, pocket. But I definitely suggest, if your only practice or experience lighting fires is with a lighter or even a regular ferro rod with, say, something like dryer lint or a Vaseline pad, that you try doing what JonXArmy did yesterday, and that is the magnesium fire starting rods, which I said you can get at the checkout line in many places. Harbor Freight, absolutely, you can get them for like $1.99. They're everywhere. So practice with it, because he found out the hard way. Fortunately, during a time of peace where he didn't have to make that fire, but he stayed on it. Like I said, you're on a live stream and it's not going well. There's a lot of people would have either, I don't know, made up an excuse or faked, you know, like they lost their link, their connection to the live stream, or they would have found some way to bail out of that, because it wasn't looking good for them. It was, like I said, it was painful to watch. And there were so many mistakes made that I didn't even comment on the video. I was just like sitting there staring at it with my jaw, like I couldn't believe some of the mistakes that were being made. But he's going to learn from that, and we may find ourselves very shortly in a situation, especially with winter coming up, where you're going to need fire, and you should be comfortable with more ways than just lighting a Bic lighter to wadded up newspaper, because that's not always going to be an option. When he was making the coffee and finally got it going, I was thinking, you know, this whole thing would have worked so much better with a Dakota fire pole, because once he finally got that fire going after all that time, it was an above ground fire 2 feet off the ground that, under the right circumstances and the right conditions, you could spot that thing from quite a distance. And when people haven't eaten in a while, if he started cooking on that, people are going to be able to smell food from a vast distance once they've gone a week without eating, and somebody's cooking somewhere. You're going to be able to smell that from quite a distance. So the Dakota fire hole, like I said, if it comes down, if the purpose of your fire is to cook or to boil water, definitely go with the Dakota fire hole, because they're virtually invisible. The heat is all concentrated to one spot. The wind generally isn't going to blow them out. He was having some trouble with the wind. Had that been a Dakota fire hole where the fire was 12 inches below the surface, the wind wouldn't have been a problem. He would have been able to just set something over that hole and set that coffee, the water on there to boil. Would have boiled quickly, and there would have been literally no evidence. It would have been visible from a distance, and if he was then going to continue on, just kick the dirt back in the hole, it's like it was never there. So I understand that the Dakota fire hole is like kind of a notch up from what he was doing yesterday, but if you have never dug a Dakota fire hole, I highly recommend that you do so to get practice doing it. And if you've never started a fire with the Magnesium Striker, do like JonXArmy did and practice it. I give him credit for having the balls to have his first time he ever tried that being a live stream. A lot of people wouldn't do that. They would just record themselves doing it and edit it and then post it and make it look like that they made this fire using the striker in a minute. He laid it all out there for everyone to see the difficulties that he experienced, and like I said, I hope he learns a valuable lesson about not smothering that fire by piling crap on it too soon, and not having all your wood gathered ahead of time. Because like I said, once that magnesium lights, you've got a very short window to get stuff going. And fire can go out really quick if you step away even for 20-30 seconds to grab some more twigs that are 20 feet away. You turn around, that fire's out. And it's psychologically depressing, because you did all this work, you got it, and you see the flame, you're thinking, I've got fire. You turn around and it's out, and you realize I have to start from scratch, and it can take the wind out of your sails. So do like JonXArmy did yesterday, and like I said, I'll put a link to the video below so you can see what I was talking about. Those of you experienced with this kind of stuff, you're going to get really frustrated at the mistakes you see made, but for those who haven't done a fire from scratch, basically using a magnesium ferro rod, I highly recommend that you watch it. Even if you end up fast forwarding through parts of it, watch it to see his struggles, because like I said, like we said, I think we said it during the fireside chat, is if just because somebody's ex-military doesn't mean that they know how to do everything, or that you should trust them, or anything else. Obviously he's ex-Army, and he struggled for a full hour to make a fire big enough to boil a small pan of water on to make a cup of coffee. If you need a fire to cook actual food, or to keep you from freezing, to keep you warm enough to where you didn't freeze, his fire was nowhere near that. That wouldn't have worked. That fire would not have kept him warm. I think it went out by the time he had boiled the water. So although he got it going, it was just enough basically to boil 2 cups of water to make a cup of coffee, and that was an hour's work. So that is not a situation I want any of you to find yourselves in. So, I mean, he did this in his backyard. So find some time, go in your backyard, go to Harbor Freight or wherever and get yourself one of those magnesium ferro rod fire starters and practice, because it's a lot harder than you think. I know I've used them before and I've gotten the fire going in a couple minutes, but it is not my preferred method. I would put it near the very end of fire making options. I don't like using them. It's a lot of work. Another thing, is the rod has the striker and the part that it's the same piece, but you strike with it and you also use it to scrape off the magnesium. It's on a little chain attached to it so you don't lose it. I highly recommend taking that off before you start going to town. He left it chained on there, and so he only had this little bit of room. He didn't have the full motion of his arm. He was really constrained to his movements because he left that. I think towards the end he may have either taken that off or it popped off on accident and he just left it off. Towards the end, when he got the fire going, I don't think it was connected anymore, and he was able to more freely like strike better and scrape easier because like I said, it was a very painful video to watch for me, and I'm sure for a lot of others, but also very informative, and I suggest you take the time to watch it and then try and do what he did. Try to avoid the mistakes he made and see how quickly you can get a fire going using that method, because it's not my favorite method. It's like I said, it's near the bottom of the list, but you need to know how to do it, because by the time you are using the magnesium rod to get a fire going, you're fairly desperate and you're very low on materials to get fires going, so you better know how to use it. I think that's all for now. Thanks, JonXArmy. Keep up the good work. Like I said, I have mad respect for you for doing that live, and do it again. I want to see you cut your time way down, which I think you will. I think if you do it again, you'll have it in a fraction of the time. So, peace.